Oklahoma is the land of second chances. Who were the people that made it so? We'll dig for the golden threads they've woven through Oklahoma history. The Red River Institute and Atwood's Ranch and Home are proud to present Oklahoma Gold. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert, along with award-winning author and Southern Nazarene University historian John J. Dwyer. We'll find the golden nuggets of Oklahoma history here now. Oklahoma Gold. Oklahoma's Cherokee General. John J. Dwyer, what is this story?
Gwin, let's just say we're going to probably blow up a lot of preconceived notions with this story of indeed Cherokee Chief and General Stan Watie, a true Oklahoman. The Cherokees, as some of our listeners know, before they were in Indian Territory, which became Oklahoma, were spread across 6 states in the southeastern United States. That was up till the late 1700s, up through the 1830s. That many different detachments of them came under many different circumstances to the future Oklahoma. Stan Watie, meanwhile, his Cherokee name, Dagadaga, or something like that, meant he stands on 2 feet, hence the translation to stand as his anglicized name. He was born near Rome, Georgia, northern Georgia, in 1806. This was a man who, early on, his talent was evident, his qualities of character. He earned a law license as a Cherokee, and that would have been in the 1820s. He was clerk of the Cherokee Nation's Supreme Court in 1827 at the ripe old age of 21 years. He was a leader later on in the Cherokee Golden Age. In those days in the southeast United States, the Cherokees were flourishing. They were greatly advanced and had assimilated in so many ways with the growing American culture, educationally, the Christian religion, business enterprises, many other ways of living. And Stan Watie, in fact, as quoted by one of his biographers, Wilfred Knight, in the book Red Fox, quote, "The Moravian Mission School educational training during Watie's formative period imbued him with strong spiritual qualities. His letters and correspondences are written in English or Cherokee were occasionally reflective of his biblical knowledge, and he joined the Moravian Church while still in school." And this was the time of Sequoyah coming up with the Cherokee syllabary or alphabet. It was the time of the Cherokee Phoenix, the first publication, newspaper, printed in both alternating English and Cherokee columns in 1828, the first of any Aboriginal people in North America. And then there was Cherokee Principal Chief John Ross, a giant of Cherokee history, the principal chief for over 40 years. But as some of our listeners know, there was a growing divide within the Cherokee Party over whether to leave for the offered lands in Indian Territory or to stay in the Southeast. It wasn't an easy decision. There were strong arguments on both sides. John Ross, leading the majority of the party, was trying to hold out no matter what came, thinking he could outlast any American presidential administration. Stan Watie and some others, though, called the Progressives, saw the imminent destruction of their tribe with the whiskey peddling that was going on among them from white whiskey peddlers, a gold rush that had stolen many of their lands, and they believed that nothing less than tribal extermination awaited if they did not depart for the West. So in 1835, the controversial New Echota Treaty was signed by Watie and some other leaders of the Cherokee Nation, but not the principal chief, who was the ultimate, much like our president today, leader. For $5 million offered by the government, which was offered previously many times and not taken by John Ross. Actually, John Ross had asked for that amount, and then when it was offered, changed his mind and declined it. Well, Watie and others said, we're going to do this. So they departed for the West, approximately 2,000 Cherokees. They've been accused by historians of personally profiting from this. I find that not believable, though, when you consider that Watie's own brother had to borrow funds from Samuel Worcester, who we've talked about in previous programs on here, Gwin, a Presbyterian white minister, just to build a modest wooden home in Indian Territory. This money went to the Cherokee Nation, not the individuals. Well, there was trouble and a virtual civil war for some years after Stan Watie's older brother, his uncle, and his close cousin were all, depending on your political point of view within the Cherokee Nation, were either executed or murdered by the people from the majority of the tribe that had gotten to Indian Territory on the Trail of Tears, which was a bitter travail through the winter months across the southern United States. Stan Watie, though, stepped up despite the loss of his own brother and other kinsmen when he saw that it had become so destructive within the tribe after nearly all the Cherokees had gotten to Indian Territory, future Oklahoma. He approached John Ross, the principal chief himself, and reached out the olive branch to put aside their differences and to come together as one. And then proceeded what is now known as the Cherokee Golden Age, from the mid-1840s up until the Civil War, where the tribe in so many ways prospered and grew in Oklahoma. Well, unfortunately, though, America's war became the war of the native tribes as well. But as we've talked about also before, many people fought that war for many different reasons. Slavery was certainly a major reason why there was a war between North and South. But that wasn't the primary reason for many people. For instance, in Indian Territory, the tribes were slave owners. And I know that my students oftentimes at Southern Nazarene University are shocked to find out that natives had African American slaves up until the Civil War. Well, that's true. But yet, natives that went with the northern side and the southern side, both factions had slave owners among them. The primary reason that the Cherokees and the other 5 Indian republics, traditionally referred to as the 5 civilized tribes in the past, seceded or went with the South was spoken in their own declaration by the people of the Cherokee Nation of the causes which have impelled them to unite their fortunes with those of the Confederate States of America. You know, back then they loved long titles, and that was their title. And what they said in that declaration, quote, "Providence rules the destinies of nations and events. By inexorable necessity, it overrules human resolutions. In the states which still adhered to the Union, a military despotism has displaced the civil power, and the laws became silent amid arms. Free speech and almost free thought became a crime. The mandate of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States was set at naught by the military power, and this outrage on common right approved by a president sworn to support the Constitution," end quote. And we break into more detail on why the Cherokees came to believe that in our book, The Oklahomans, on the Civil War chapter, as well as our book, The War Between the States. And so the die was cast, and the Cherokee natives, they were going to be on the side of the South as the Civil War opened in 1861.
Well, how did Stan Watie become Oklahoma's Cherokee General? We'll find out when we come back. This is Oklahoma Gold. So how did Stan Watie become Oklahoma's Cherokee General? John J. Dwyer? Please, the Golden Nugget.
Where we left off, Gwin, Fort Sumter and the guns had sounded for the American Civil War. And the Indian nations in Indian Territory, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, went with the South. Minority factions stayed with the North, and some others went with the North later when they were starving. But the majority of them fought for the Confederacy, and Stan Watie quickly became the leader among all the natives on either side in the war between the states in the Indian Territory area of operations. His fame first really began to grow at the Battle of Elkhorn Tavern, or Pea Ridge. Though the South lost the battle, Stan Watie and his Cherokee mounted rifles distinguished themselves. And here's a description of one of his biographers of how they looked on that battlefield. They dismounted, some of their men still in the saddles. 2 Cherokee regiments swept forward along with part of the 9th Texas Cavalry, and the bearded, wild-eyed Texans matched stride with Watie's warriors, brandishing shotguns, rifles, tomahawks, knives, and bows and arrows. The Indians charged the field with wild shrieks and war cries, and they hit the Union cavalry regulars even before they had a chance to pull their flying artillery or cannons back. Stan Watie and his Cherokees took the Union cannon and turned them and unleashed them on the fleeing foe on the battlefield. And here's what one of Watie's own men, what was called the Cherokee Mounted Rifles, how he remembered the Battle of Pea Ridge. Quote, "I don't know how we did it, but Watie gave the order, which he always led, and his men could follow him into the very jaws of death. The Indian rebel yell was given, and we fought like tigers, 3-1. It must have been that mysterious power of Stan Watie that led us on to make the capture of all those Union cannon against such odds." End quote. Not only was Stan Watie a formidable commander, but there were other big names in Oklahoma history shoulder to shoulder with him. William Penn Adair. Adair County in eastern Oklahoma was named after. Not long ago, we had a Speaker of the House in Oklahoma named Larry Adair, and he was a direct descendant of William Penn Adair. Or how about Stan Watie's cavalry scout, Clem Rogers, not only a founding father of the state of Oklahoma, but the father of Will Rogers. He rode saddle by saddle with Stan Watie in the Civil War in Indian Territory. And a lot of you, if you're like me, I didn't even know or certainly didn't remember that war took place in Oklahoma. Many skirmishes, many battles, such as the capture of the Union riverboat J.R. Williams by Stan Watie, by now a full colonel. Where was it? It was on the Arkansas River, not far from Fort Gibson. That was an exploit that was stunning because this ship was bringing supplies and reinforcements and all sorts of other things to Indian Territory, to the fort at Fort Gibson, and it was ambushed and everything hauled away by Stan Watie's mounted Indian cavalrymen. Or how about the Second Battle of Cabin Creek near Veneta up in northeastern Oklahoma? This was a battle that Stan Watie launched an ambush against the Union Army, a 300 wagon train column in the middle of the night. The only light they had was the moon. That's something you don't normally do, especially back in the 1800s. And yet, by winning that battle, Stan Watie was able to claim tens of millions of dollars in 2020's value worth of booty from that, clothed his entire army, fed every Confederate soldier and civilian in the Indian Territory for over a month, stopped a strategic Union advance, and his entire brigade re-enlisted. Well, that battle also got Stan Watie promoted to Brigadier General, the only Native American general on either side during the Civil War. And he had, through that war, Confederates, Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, and many others on his side. But do you know, and I know you're wanting to know the golden nugget, that one of the most memorable things about Stan Watie is not his aptitude in combat or leading people in war. Something very different, stretching back to that early Moravian missionary training. For during the height of the war, his wife, Sarah Watie, wrote a letter to him when she heard that their son had been involved in the death of a prisoner. She wrote, "Stan Watie, tell my boys to always show mercy as they expect to find God merciful to them. It almost runs me crazy to hear such things. I find myself almost dead sometimes thinking about it. If you should ever catch William Ross," who, by the way, was the anti-treaty party or the enemy, intertribal enemy of Stan Watie, and the son-in-law of Cherokee Principal John Ross, and a convert to the Union side. Sarah Watie said, "If you ever catch William Ross, don't have him killed. I know how bad his mother would feel, but keep him till the war is over for the sake of his old mother. And then I want them to know that you don't want to kill them just to get them out of your way." Well, Stan Watie responded in his own letter that we have to his wife, "It seems that is my doom. Let me act as I will. My conduct is always considered wrong. No charity was ever shown me, yet I have lived through, and it would be supposed that I would become hardened and would be reckless. But it still hurts my feelings. I am not a murderer. I call upon my God to judge me. He knows that I love my friends, and above all, my wife and children, the opinion of the world to contrary, notwithstanding. And Gwin, you might be surprised to learn that Stan Watie actually did capture that young William P. Ross, nephew of the Cherokee principal chief, who was by now wearing the colors of blue for the Union. And rather than do harm to him, he kept him and then returned him to the Union forces. And some years later, as a much older man, William Ross, who was a very young man when Stan Watie captured him, rose to become not only the chief of the Cherokee Nation, but the chief that helped reunite the northern and southern factions of the tribe in the post-war years.
That's Oklahoma Gold.